It was Christmas time in Winter Hollow, a small town in Vermont. The town was known for its big holiday celebrations, with streets full of bright lights and garlands on every lamppost. The Festival of Lights was happening, and the air smelled like roasted chestnuts and fresh pine trees. People were laughing, and carolers were singing on street corners. Victor was walking alone. He wore a nice coat, but it didn't keep him warm in the cold. Victor had a lot of money and was successful, but this was the first Christmas without his daughter Emma. She had died in an accident earlier that year, and since then, Victor had felt empty inside. Christmas, which used to be his favorite time of year, now reminded him of everything he had lost. He passed shops with pretty decorations and saw families laughing together, but it didn't make him feel anything. He was walking home from a charity party he had gone out of duty, not because he really wanted to. His car was waiting, but he found himself walking through the town center, drawn to the Christmas lights. As he crossed the main square, he saw a small stall with a sign that said, "Handmade Christmas ornaments, 50 cents each." Behind the stall was a girl, no older than 11. She was wearing a big coat that was too big for her, and her face was pale. She was wiping her eyes, though she tried to hide her tears. Victor stopped and looked at her. There was something about her that made him stop. She reminded him of Emma when she was younger. "Why are you crying?" he asked gently. The girl looked up, surprised. She quickly wiped her face with her sleeve and said, "I'm not crying. I'm just cold." Victor didn't believe her, but didn't say anything. "What's your name?" he asked. "Isla," she answered, her voice steady but her hands shaking as she fixed one of the ornaments on the table. It was a little angel made of paper and ribbon. "Did you make this?" Victor asked. Isla nodded. "I made all of them." Victor looked at the angel for a moment and then took out a $20 bill. "I'll take it." When he handed her the money, she shook her head. "I don't need charity. If you want it, it's 50 cents. Victor was surprised by her pride, but admired it. He pulled out a quarter and 2 dimes and handed them to her. She took the money and put the angel in a small bag. "Why are you out here so late, Isla? Shouldn't you be home?" Victor asked. "I'm trying to sell enough ornaments to buy something for my sister," Isla said quietly. "It's Christmas Eve, and I promised her." "Where are your parents?" Victor asked before he could stop himself. "They're gone," Isla said without any sadness in her voice. "It's just me and Amelia now." Victor felt bad for asking, but he couldn't stop wondering about her. He watched her trying to make her stall look nice, while few people stopped to look at her ornaments. Most people were busy looking at the bigger, fancier displays nearby. "Tell you what," Victor said after thinking for a moment. "I'll buy all your ornaments." Isla looked surprised. "Why would you do that?" "Let's just say I could use some Christmas spirit," Victor said, even though he didn't fully understand why he felt that way. Isla hesitated, torn between her pride and her wish to get a gift for her sister. Finally, she nodded, and as she packed up the rest of her ornaments, Victor noticed her hands were red and sore from the cold. Before he left, Isla looked at him carefully. "You remind me of someone," she said. Victor was startled. "Who?" "My mom," Isla said quietly. "You have her eyes." Those words hit Victor hard. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. But before he could answer, Isla turned away and finished packing up. Victor stood there for a moment, feeling confused. As he walked back to his car, Isla's words kept echoing in his mind. "You have her eyes." He thought about Sophia, the woman he had loved long ago. He hadn't thought about her in years, but now, her face appeared in his mind. He had left her behind to chase after money and success, but he wondered if she had moved on, or if she still thought about him. That night, Victor sat alone in his study, looking at an old photo album. He hadn't opened it in a long time. Inside were pictures of him and Sophia when they were young and happy. There was a picture of them walking in the wild meadows by Winter Hollow, where they used to go together. Victor closed the album and looked at the angel ornament Isla had given him. It seemed like too much of a coincidence. He decided that the next day, he would try to find Isla again. The next morning, Victor went back to the square where he had met Isla, but the stall was gone. The square was quieter now, with no more Christmas Eve excitement. He searched for her, but she was nowhere to be found. After an hour of searching, he went to a small cafe to warm up and have coffee. "Are you looking for someone?" the barista asked, noticing him looking around. "A girl about 11 years old. She was selling ornaments here last night," Victor replied. The barista thought for a moment. "Ah, you must mean Isla. Sweet girl. She comes here sometimes to warm up with hot cocoa. She lives down on Maple Street near the old mill." Victor thanked her and left a tip before heading to Maple Street. It was in a part of town he hadn't been to in years, where the houses weren't as nice and the streets looked old. He found the small house easily. It looked worn and run down. He knocked on the door, his heart racing. There was no answer at first, and he started to think maybe he had made a mistake. But then the door creaked open, and there was Isla, surprised but happy to see him. "You came back," she said. "I wanted to see you again," Victor said. "May I come in?" Isla hesitated for a moment, looking over her shoulder. "Amelia's sleeping," she said quietly. "But okay." She stepped aside and let Victor in. The apartment was small, but it was clean. There were Christmas decorations made from paper strung across the room. In the corner, a little girl, no older than 6, was sleeping on an old couch with a blanket that was almost too small for her. Isla asked Victor to sit at the tiny kitchen table. "I wanted to ask you about your mother," Victor said carefully. "You said something yesterday about me having her eyes. What did you mean by that?" Isla looked at him for a moment, deciding whether or not to trust him. Finally, she stood up and took a small box from a shelf. She opened it and pulled out an old photo. She handed the photo to Victor, and his hands trembled as he saw it. It was a picture of Sophia when she was younger, standing in front of a small house with a baby in her arms. "That's my mom," Isla said. "And that's me when I was a baby." Victor stared at the photo, feeling shocked. He had never expected this. "My mother, Sophia," he whispered. Isla nodded. "She died when I was 5. She got sick. It's just been me and Amelia since then." Victor felt his chest tighten. The woman he had loved, the woman he thought he had left behind, was gone. But here was Isla, looking so much like her. Victor stared at her, his heart filled with emotion. "Isla," he said softly, "I think I might be your father." Isla looked at him in shock and confusion. "What?" Victor reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "I don't know for sure, but I knew your mother a long time ago. I loved her, and when I look at you, I see her. I see Emma. I see family." For the first time, Isla's tough face softened, and tears filled her eyes. She pulled her hands away and hugged herself tightly. "You can't just come here and say that," she whispered. "You don't know what it's been like." Victor's voice softened. "You're right. I don't. But I want to know you. I want to know you and Amelia." Victor wanted to make things right. He looked at Isla, but she didn't say anything. For a moment, he thought he saw hope in her eyes, though they were full of tears. Isla didn't speak for a long time. She sat at the small table, hugging herself tightly and looking at the floor. Victor wanted to say more, to fill the silence with comforting words, but he knew this moment wasn't about him. It was about her. He could see how hard it was for her to understand what he had just told her, and he didn't want to make it worse by saying too much. "I don't know what to think," Isla finally said, her voice soft. "You say you might be my dad, but where were you all this time? Why didn't you come for us before?" Her question hit Victor like a punch. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He ran his hand over his face. "I didn't know Isla," he said softly. "If I had known, things would have been different. Your mom and I loved each other a long time ago, but I left Winter Hollow. I thought she had moved on, that her life had gone in a different direction. I never imagined." His voice trailed off. I never imagined you existed. Isla's face softened a little, but she still looked unsure. Mom never talked about you much, she said quietly. She just said there was someone she loved, but he wasn't around anymore. She always seemed sad when she talked about it. So I stopped asking questions. Victor felt a lump in his throat. The thought of Sophia being sad all those years, raising Isla and Amelia on her own, was hard to bear. Your mom was an incredible woman, he said. And if I failed her, if I failed you, I'm so sorry. Isla didn't answer right away, but she didn't pull her hand away when Victor gently placed his hand on hers. For a brief moment, they shared a fragile connection, one that could either break or grow stronger with time. Before either of them could say anything else, they heard a soft whimper from the couch. Amelia was waking up. Isla quickly got up and went to her sister, gently brushing her forehead. It's okay, Amelia. Go back to sleep, she whispered. Amelia blinked sleepily, her big brown eyes focusing on Victor. Who's that? She asked in a small voice. Victor smiled gently. I'm a friend of your sister, he said, not wanting to give too much information to the little girl. Amelia sat up a little, still holding her blanket. Did you bring presents? She asked, her voice full of hope, like a child expecting something exciting. Victor hesitated, but Isla stepped in, answering for him. Not yet, she said, glancing at Victor. But maybe he can help us get some breakfast. The suggestion felt like a lifeline. It was a small way to move forward. Victor nodded. I'd be happy to. Let me take you both somewhere warm where we can eat. My treat. Isla looked unsure, but Amelia's face lit up at the idea of food. Can we get pancakes? Amelia asked excitedly. Isla sighed but gave a small nod. Okay, but just breakfast, she said. Victor smiled, feeling like he had won a small victory. He helped Isla bundle Amelia up in her coat and hat, and they all went outside together. The walk to the diner was short, but the cold air made Amelia shiver. Victor, without thinking, wrapped his scarf around her shoulders. She looked up at him with wide eyes, but didn't say anything. When they reached the diner, it was busy with families, and the smell of fresh coffee and syrup filled the air. Victor led Isla and Amelia to a booth by the window where they could watch the snow falling outside. The waitress smiled at them and took their orders, looking at Isla and Amelia with curiosity and kindness. While they waited for their food, Victor noticed how protective Isla was of Amelia. She made sure Amelia was okay, helped her unwrap her utensils, and carefully poured syrup on her pancakes. It was clear that Isla took care of her sister a lot, more than any kid should have to. You're a good sister, Victor said quietly, not wanting to embarrass her, but feeling he needed to say it. Isla glanced at him, her face guarded. Someone has to be, she said simply. Victor nodded and didn't say anything more. He didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable. Instead, he focused on Amelia, who was happily eating her pancakes. These must be the best pancakes in town, Victor said with a smile. Amelia giggled. They're so good. We don't usually get to eat out like this. Victor's smile faltered a little, but he quickly recovered. Well, maybe we can make it a tradition, he said. Christmas pancakes every year. Isla looked at him sharply, narrowing her eyes. You can't just show up and start talking about traditions, she said, her voice quiet but firm. You don't even know us. Victor held up his hands in surrender. You're right, he said. I don't know you. Not yet. But I'd like to, if you let me. Isla didn't answer right away, but the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease a little. She looked down at her plate and started pushing her pancake back and forth with her fork. I don't know if we can trust you, she said finally. What if you leave like everyone else? Victor's chest tightened. He didn't want to hurt her anymore. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. I promise you that. Isla looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of dishonesty. For a moment, it felt like everything depended on whether she could trust him or not. Finally, she gave a tiny nod. It wasn't much, but to Victor, it felt like a small step forward. They finished breakfast mostly in silence, but the mood was lighter now. Amelia kept chatting happily, talking about her favorite Christmas movies and what she hoped Santa would bring her. Victor listened carefully to every word, while Isla watched him closely, as if testing whether his interest was real. When they left the diner, the snow was falling even more heavily, covering the streets in white. Victor walked them back to their apartment. The only sound was the soft crunch of their footsteps in the snow. When they reached the door, Isla turned to him. "Thanks for breakfast," she said, "but I still don't know what to think about all this." Victor nodded. "That's okay," he said gently. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, a faint smile touched Isla's lips. It wasn't much, but to Victor, it felt like the beginning of something important. Later that day, after they had left, Victor couldn't stop thinking about everything. Back at his rented house, he replayed every word, every glance. He remembered how hard Isla had looked and the small bit of hope he had seen in her eyes. He also thought about Amelia's innocent laughter. He felt guilty, but also a strong desire to be there for them, to show them that he would stay. The next morning, Victor woke up with a new sense of purpose. For years, he had donated money to charities during the holidays, thinking that was enough. But this time, things were different. Isla and Amelia needed more than just gifts. They needed someone who would be there for them, not just for Christmas, but every day after. Victor started making calls. He contacted a private investigator to find out more about Isla and Amelia's life, how they were living, and if there were any relatives who might want to take them. He also spoke to a lawyer about getting custody of them, although he knew it was too soon to talk to Isla about that. He decided to take action in smaller ways first. He went to the town square, where Christmas decorations were still being cleaned up. He visited shops and quietly bought supplies, warm coats, boots, and groceries. He didn't want to overwhelm Isla, but he couldn't bear the thought of them going without essentials in the cold winter. Later that day, he returned to their apartment, balancing the bags of supplies in his arms. As Victor knocked on the door, it was Amelia who answered. Her face lit up when she saw him. "You came back," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Isla came out of the small kitchen, looking a little worried. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and asked, "What are you doing here?" Her voice was more curious than angry. Victor put the bags down near the door and pointed to them. "I thought you might need a few things, coats, boots, some food," he said. Isla frowned and glanced at the bags. "We're not a charity case," she said. Victor smiled gently. "I know. This isn't charity. It's family helping family." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Victor was worried he had said too much. But then Amelia, not noticing the tension, started digging through the bags. She pulled out a bright pink coat and squealed with joy. "Look, Isla, it's so warm." Isla's shoulders relaxed a little, though she didn't smile. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice softer now. "I wanted to," Victor replied. "And if you ever need anything else, just tell me." Amelia tugged on Isla's sleeve. "Can we try them on, please?" Isla sighed, but there was a hint of affection in her exasperation. "Fine, but only because you need a new coat." As the girls tried on their new winter clothes, Victor looked around the small apartment. The cracks in the walls and the old furniture told him how hard things had been for them. His heart ached, not just for their tough times, but for all the years he hadn't been there to help. He didn't expect forgiveness, but he was ready to work hard to earn it. Later, as they sat around the small kitchen table, Victor tried to learn more about their lives. Amelia, always full of talk, happily shared stories about school and her favorite books. But Isla was quieter, her eyes occasionally glancing at Victor, almost like she was trying to figure him out. "What do you do?" Isla suddenly asked, cutting through Amelia's chatter. Victor put down his coffee cup and smiled a little. "I run a company. We build things, homes, offices, places where people can live and work." Isla nodded slowly. Is that why you left? To build things? Victor's smile faded, and he thought carefully before answering. I left because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I wanted to be successful, to make something of myself. But looking back, I realized I left behind the things that really mattered. Isla didn't say anything, but her eyes softened, and Victor could tell she was listening, even if she wasn't ready to talk about it. As the afternoon went on, Victor saw that Isla was starting to relax a little. When Amelia suggested they all play a board game, Isla didn't argue. Victor joined in, and surprisingly, he found himself laughing as Amelia excitedly explained the rules. For the first time in years, Victor felt a small spark of something he thought he had lost. Hope. It was delicate, like a tiny candle flame in the wind, but it warmed him in a way that money and success never had. When it was time to leave, Victor stood by the door, not sure how to say goodbye. I'll see you again soon, he said, looking at Isla. If that's okay? Isla hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Okay. As Victor stepped out into the cold evening air, he felt a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The road ahead would still be long, but for the first time, he believed it was worth it. Worth it for Isla, for Amelia, and for the chance to become the man he should have been all along. In the following days, Victor made sure to visit Isla and Amelia regularly. He never came empty-handed, but he was careful not to overwhelm them. Sometimes he brought groceries or a small treat for Amelia, like a coloring book she loved. Other times, he simply came to listen and learn more about the two girls who had unexpectedly become the center of his world. At first, Isla was still skeptical. She remained polite but distant, like she was waiting for Victor to disappoint her. But Amelia, with her natural warmth, quickly grew attached to Victor. She showed him her favorite toys, told him about her drawings, and made him laugh with her endless chatter. Victor found himself cherishing her joy, and he began to feel like part of their world. One evening, as snow fell heavily outside their window, Victor brought over a small box filled with Christmas ornaments and a little artificial tree. He didn't want to assume too much, but he had noticed there were no holiday decorations in their home, and he thought it might cheer them up. Christmas is over, Isla said when she saw the box. Her voice was skeptical but not mean. I know, Victor replied, smiling. But I thought we could have one last celebration. Just us. Amelia clapped her hands with excitement. Can we decorate it, Isla, please? Isla hesitated, looking between Victor and her sister. Then, with a small sigh, she nodded. Okay, together. They set up the tree in the corner of the room. Amelia eagerly unwrapped each ornament, her face lighting up at the colorful decorations. Victor helped her hang them, lifting her so she could reach the higher branches. Isla worked quietly, adding ornaments here and there while occasionally glancing at Victor, almost like she was studying him, checking if he was being sincere. When the tree was done, Victor plugged in the lights, and the room was filled with a warm golden glow. Amelia gasped and clapped. It's so pretty. It is. Victor agreed softly, looking at Isla. What do you think? Isla shrugged, but there was a faint smile on her face. It's nice. They sat together, enjoying the lights on the tree. Victor told them stories about the Christmases he used to have with his daughter, Emma, when she was Amelia's age. He talked carefully, not wanting to bring up any sad memories for Isla, but she listened closely, her eyes fixed on him. Did Emma like Christmas? Isla asked suddenly. Victor nodded. She loved it. She always wanted to put the star on top of the tree, even when she was too small to reach. I'd have to lift her up every year. Amelia giggled. I'd like to do that too. Isla glanced at her sister, her expression softening. Maybe next year. Victor's heart warmed at Isla's words. It was the first time she had talked about a future that included him. It was a small step, but it felt huge. As the night went on, Amelia grew tired and curled up on the couch with a blanket. Victor stayed a little longer, talking quietly with Isla while Amelia slept. They talked about school, about their dreams, and about what they liked to do together. At first, Isla's answers were short and careful, but soon she started to open up, sharing memories of their mother. She used to sing to us, Isla said quietly, every night before bed. Amelia doesn't remember, but I do. It was always the same song. Victor hesitated, unsure if he should ask, but finally he did. Do you miss her? Isla looked down at her lap, and Victor could tell it was hard for her to talk about. Every day, she whispered. Victor nodded, his chest tight. I miss her too. I didn't get to know her the way I should have, but she gave the world two amazing girls. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Isla didn't respond, but her eyes were shiny, and Victor knew his words had reached her. Before he left, he pulled out an envelope and handed it to Isla. This is for you, he said. It's not much, but I thought you might like it. Isla opened the envelope slowly and found 2 tickets for a children's play at the theater. Amelia's been asking about the Christmas play, Victor said. I thought it might be something fun for you both to do together. Isla stared at the tickets for a moment, her face unreadable. Why are you doing all this? She asked, her voice soft but steady. Victor looked at her with sincerity. Because you both deserve it. And because I want to be here for you. Not just now, but for as long as you'll let me. Isla didn't say anything, but Victor saw the tiniest spark in her eyes. Maybe it was trust. Maybe it was hope. It was small, but enough to remind him why he was there. As he stepped into the cold night, Victor felt a peace he hadn't felt in years. He still had a long way to go before he earned Isla's full trust, but for the first time, he believed it was possible. The future felt brighter than it had in a long time. In the weeks that followed, Victor became a steady part of Isla and Amelia's lives. His visits became part of their routine. With each visit, their bond grew stronger. Amelia's joy was easy to see, and she treated Victor like he had always been part of their world. Isla remained cautious, but little by little, she started to trust him more. Victor respected Isla's pace. He didn't hurry her or try to push her. Instead, he let his actions show how much he cared. Every time he visited, he brought small things to make their life easier, like ingredients for dinner, a warm blanket for the couch, or a board game they could all play together. He spent time fixing things around their apartment, like a squeaky cabinet door, a dripping faucet in the bathroom, and a broken heater that hadn't been keeping the girls warm on the coldest nights. He worked quietly, knowing that even the little things mattered. It wasn't just the things he fixed that made Isla start to soften. Victor really listened to her. He paid attention when she talked, whether it was something small about school or a rare mention of her mom. Slowly, Isla began to trust him. She shared stories about the time before everything changed, talking about the songs her mom used to sing, the stories they made up together, and the nights they dreamed about a future that now felt so far away. One evening, as Victor sat at their kitchen table watching Amelia color, Isla spoke up from where she was folding laundry. Mom used to say Christmas was magic, she said thoughtfully. She said no matter how hard things were, it was a time to believe in something good. Victor nodded. Your mom was a wise woman. Isla looked at him, then asked, Do you believe in Christmas magic? Victor smiled a little, feeling the weight of his own sadness. I didn't, not for a long time, but meeting you and Amelia, it's starting to feel like maybe your mom was right. Isla didn't look away this time. She gave him a small nod, as if accepting his answer. A week later, Victor learned some surprising things from the private investigator he had hired. He found out how hard Sophia had worked to take care of Isla after Victor left, doing multiple jobs while trying to protect her daughter from the tough things they were facing. The investigator also found letters that Sophia had written to Victor, but never sent. She had written them just before she got sick. The letters were full of love, hope, and regret. Sophia hadn't wanted to bother Victor, but she always hoped he might come back to Winter Hollow and meet the family he didn't know he had. Among the letters was a photo of Sophia and a young Isla, no more than 3 years old, standing by a Christmas tree. Isla was smiling, holding a paper angel ornament that looked very familiar to Victor. The discovery made Victor even more determined. He shared the letters with Isla, unsure how she would feel. She didn't push them away. Instead, she sat quietly at the table, reading through them. Her face showed a mix of longing and sadness. Amelia was too young to understand, but Isla seemed to understand what her mom had left behind. She wanted you to know, Isla said softly after a long silence, her voice trembling a little. Even if she couldn't tell you herself, Victor reached across the table and gently put his hand over hers. Now that I do, he said, I promise I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you and Amelia, for as long as you'll let me be. This time, Isla didn't pull her hand away. She nodded, her eyes full of unshed tears. Okay, she whispered. In the days that followed, Victor took more steps to help build a better future for Isla and Amelia. He contacted a lawyer to make sure he could have a more permanent role in their lives, giving them stability and security. He also made plans to move them out of their small apartment into a house in Winter Hollow, one that was warm and filled with light, a place where they could start over together. The move was a day full of excitement and nerves. Amelia loved it. She ran around the house, excited to explore every room. Isla was quieter, keeping her emotions carefully hidden, but Victor noticed how her eyes lit up when she saw the room he had made for her. It was simple, but he had added little touches. A cozy bed, a bookshelf for the books she had mentioned, and a desk where she could do her homework. You didn't have to do all this, Isla said softly, standing in the doorway of her new room. I wanted to, Victor said with a smile. You deserve it. Isla turned to face him. It's just a lot. I'm not used to people staying or caring. Victor crouched down so they were eye to eye. I know it's going to take time, he said gently, but I'm here, Isla. I'm not leaving. Not now, not ever. For the first time, Isla didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped forward and gave him a hesitant hug. Victor froze for a moment, surprised by her trust. Then he hugged her back, his heart full of emotion. That night, as the first fire crackled in the new house's fireplace, Victor, Isla, and Amelia sat together on the couch, wrapped in blankets and drinking hot cocoa. Amelia fell asleep first, her head on Victor's lap, while Isla stayed awake, watching the flames. Do you think she'd be proud of us? Isla asked quietly. Your mom, Victor said softly. I think she'd be proud of both of you. And I hope, someday, she'll be proud of me too. Isla didn't say anything, but a small smile appeared on her face. For the first time in years, she felt safe. She felt seen. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, she felt that, for the first time, they weren't alone anymore. The weeks turned into months, and soon the snow started to melt, and the first signs of spring showed in Winter Hollow. For Victor, this time had been life-changing. Each day brought new challenges, but also new joys. He fully dedicated himself to being there for Isla and Amelia, learning how to find the balance between being close and giving them the space they needed. Amelia, as always, gave Victor love and affection without holding back. Her laughter filled every room, and her curiosity was endless. Isla, on the other hand, was still cautious. She was learning to trust, but Victor could see that her past still haunted her. She had carried so many heavy burdens for so long that letting go of them wasn't easy. One afternoon, as Victor worked at the kitchen table, Isla came over with her school books. She looked at him for a moment, then sat down across from him, spreading out her homework. Need any help? Victor asked, glancing up. Isla shook her head. I'm fine. But after a few minutes, Victor saw her frown in frustration. Finally, she sighed and pushed her notebook toward him. I don't get it, she admitted. Victor smiled, setting his work aside. Let me take a look. They spent the next hour working through her math problems, with Victor guiding her step by step. It was a small thing, but it meant a lot to him. He felt more like a father than ever before. When they were done, Isla smiled a real smile, not the shy, fleeting one he usually saw. "Thanks," she said softly. "You're a smart kid," Victor replied. "You just needed a little help." Isla's smile lasted longer this time, and instead of running off to her room, she stayed at the table, quietly sketching in a notebook while Victor went back to his work. It wasn't much, but it felt like a big step. It felt like she was finally starting to let him in. As spring came and the weather warmed up, Victor decided it was time to give the girls something they had never had before, a real vacation. He spent hours planning, wanting everything to be perfect. When he finally told them, it was a surprise. They were going to a cabin by a nearby lake. Amelia was so excited she could hardly sit still, but Isla, as expected, was more reserved. Still, Victor could see the spark of excitement in her eyes. The drive to the cabin was full of Amelia's chatter and music, while Isla sat quietly, looking out the window. But when they arrived, both girls were amazed by the cabin. It was a small, cozy house surrounded by tall pine trees, with a beautiful view of the sparkling lake. Over the next few days, Victor saw how the girls started to relax. Amelia spent hours splashing in the water, collecting rocks and chasing butterflies. Isla was slower to warm up, but Victor saw her sneak glances at the bookshelves in the cabin's living room. He encouraged her to pick one, and soon she was curled up by the fireplace, lost in a book. They did fun things together like hiking, roasting marshmallows, and even trying to fish, though Amelia scared all the fish away with her loud exclamations. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, Victor suggested they write messages in bottles and send them out into the water, like making a wish. "Let's write something you want to say to the world," he said. Amelia was the first to finish, folding her paper and putting it into the bottle. "I wish for a puppy," she said proudly. Isla took longer, her pencil hovering over the paper. Finally, she wrote something quickly and slipped the note into her bottle. Victor did the same, and they all walked to the dock to send their bottles onto the lake. "What did you wish for?" Amelia asked. Victor smiled, ruffling her hair. "That's a secret." Isla didn't say anything, her eyes still on the lake. Victor didn't ask her what she had written. He knew that her wish was hers to keep or share. That night, while the girls slept soundly, Victor sat by the fire, thinking about how far they had come. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still hard times ahead. But moments like these made it all worth it. For the first time in a long time, Victor felt like he was building something real. The last day of the trip brought a surprise Victor hadn't expected. As they packed up to leave, Amelia pulled him over, holding something behind her back. "I found this," she said, showing him a small wooden heart, carved with the word family on it. Victor knelt down to her level, taking the heart from her hands. "Where did you find this?" "In the little shop by the lake," Amelia said. "I thought we could hang it in our new house so it feels like home." Victor felt a lump in his throat as he looked at the small piece of wood. "It's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Amelia." Isla, standing nearby, watched quietly as they loaded into the car. She sat in the back seat and took out the book she had been reading. It wasn't until they were halfway home that she spoke. "It was a good trip," she said softly, almost like she was talking to herself. Victor looked at her in the rearview mirror. His heart felt happy. "I'm glad you think so," he said. Isla didn't say anything else, but the small smile on her face told Victor everything he needed to know. They were making progress, little by little, moment by moment, and for the first time, the road ahead felt full of hope. Back in Winter Hollow, life started to feel normal again. The trip to the lake cabin had made memories that felt like the start of something strong and lasting. Victor felt that the bond he was building with Isla and Amelia was growing deeper, though it still needed patience and care. Amelia was very open, always eager to talk about her thoughts and feelings. But Isla's trust was growing slowly, like something precious and delicate. One evening, Victor invited the girls to a small Italian restaurant in town for dinner. The restaurant was cozy, with checkered tablecloths, flickering candles, and the smell of garlic and fresh bread in the air. Amelia was excited about the outing and immediately started talking to the waiter about her favorite foods. Isla quietly looked at the menu. While they waited for their food, Victor turned to Isla. "How's school going?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "It's fine," she answered, shrugging. "I'm doing okay in most things, but history's hard." Victor smiled. "History was never my strong subject either. But if you ever need help, you know where to find me." Isla looked up at him, her face thoughtful. "You'd really help me, even if it's boring." "Of course," Victor said. "Boring or not, if it matters to you, it matters to me." Isla didn't say anything right away, but Victor saw a hint of a smile on her face as she went back to her menu. Moments like these, small but important, gave him hope. Each one felt like another piece of the puzzle they were putting together. After dinner, they walked around the town square, which was starting to change from winter decorations to early signs of spring. The twinkling lights still shone, casting a soft glow over the cobblestone streets. Amelia skipped ahead, pointing out shop windows and laughing at her own reflection. Victor and Isla walked side by side. "You know," Victor began after a quiet moment, "I've been thinking about signing Amelia up for art classes. She has a real talent for drawing." Isla nodded. "She's always loved that stuff. Mom used to find little things for her to draw with, even when we didn't have much." Victor felt a tightness in his chest when she mentioned her mom, Sophia. "Your mom sounds like she was an amazing woman." Isla's voice was soft as she replied, She always found a way to make things better, even when they weren't." Victor hesitated for a moment, then gently asked, "What about you? Is there anything you've always wanted to try? Something you'd like to do?" Isla shrugged, but there was a small flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "I don't know. I've never really thought about it." "Well," Victor said, "if you think of something, let me know. I'd like to help you make it happen." Isla looked at him, her expression searching. "Why do you care so much about us? I mean, why do you want to help?" Victor stopped walking and looked at her. His voice was steady. "Because you're my family, Isla. Whether it's official or not, that's how I feel. I want to see you and Amelia happy. I want to give you the kind of life your mom would have wanted for you." Isla studied him for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll think about it." That night, when Victor dropped them off at home, Amelia gave him a big hug before running inside. She was still excited about their evening out. Isla stayed by the car, her hands in her pockets. "Thanks for dinner," she said sincerely. "You're welcome," Victor replied. "I'll see you soon." Isla gave him a small but genuine smile before heading inside. The next morning, Victor got a call from the private investigator he had hired months ago. The investigator had been looking into Sophia's life and the reasons behind her death. The news he shared made Victor feel even sadder. Sophia had spent her last months fighting not just her illness, but also a system that wouldn't help her. Even with everything she was going through, she had never let Isla or Amelia see her sadness. She had kept fighting, always trying to protect her girls. One of the investigators' findings shocked Victor. Sophia had left a letter for him, stored with a friend named Mrs. Montgomery, who promised to give it to him if the chance ever came. Mrs. Montgomery still lived in Winter Hollow, so Victor arranged to meet her. Mrs. Montgomery welcomed him into her home with a warm smile. There was a sadness in her kind eyes as she handed him the letter. "Sophia always hoped you'd come back here," she said softly. She believed in second chances. Victor's hand shook a little as he opened the letter. It was written in Sophia's neat handwriting, filled with love and regret. "Victor," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means you found your way back to Winter Hollow. It means you found Isla and Amelia. I always hoped you would, but I wasn't brave enough to reach out myself. I didn't want to disrupt your life, but I never stopped believing you were meant to be a part of theirs. Isla has your strength and determination. Amelia has your kindness, even if she doesn't know it yet. They are the best parts of you and me, and I hope one day you'll see that for yourself. If nothing else, know that I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped believing that in some way, you'd come back to us. With all my heart, Sophia. Tears filled Victor's eyes as he read the letter. Her words wrapped around his heart like a lifeline. He felt the weight of everything he had missed, but also a deep sense of gratitude. Sophia had always believed in him, even when he hadn't deserved it. Now, he had a chance to honor her faith by becoming the man she had hoped he would be. That evening, Victor went back to Isla and Amelia's home. He tucked the letter carefully into his pocket, not sharing it with them yet, because he felt the time wasn't right. But the letter gave him a new sense of purpose. He spent the night playing games with Amelia and helping Isla with her homework. Small, ordinary moments that felt extraordinary. As he was leaving that night, Isla called out to him just before he reached the door. Victor, he turned, surprised to hear her say his name so clearly. Yes. Do you think we're going to be okay? Her voice was soft, and it made his heart ache. But he smiled. His answer was steady. I know we will. For the first time, Isla didn't just nod or give a small smile. She stepped forward and hugged him, her arms wrapped around him tightly, showing trust, hope, and something close to love. In that moment, Victor knew he was home. In the days after Isla's hug, Victor thought more about how far they had come as a family. It wasn't just the small gestures or the laughs they shared. It was the growing feeling of belonging, of being connected to each other. Every visit, every conversation, and every small victory felt like another part of the bigger picture they were creating together. He knew things weren't perfect. Sometimes, Isla still had doubts in her eyes, and Amelia asked questions about their past that neither Victor nor Isla could answer easily. But it was progress, and that was enough. One afternoon, Victor decided it was time to take another step forward. He had been working quietly with his lawyer to make things official and become Isla and Amelia's legal guardian. He knew the process would take time, but he wanted to tell Isla about it first. He knew he couldn't rush it or assume she would just agree. But he also knew that being honest was important for building their trust. He invited them over for dinner. He made their favorite dishes: spaghetti with marinara for Amelia and chicken parmesan for Isla. When they arrived, Amelia immediately ran off to explore the house, filling the space with her energy. Isla, as always, stayed back a little. Something smells good, she said casually but with curiosity. I thought it was time for a proper family dinner, Victor said with a warm smile. Hope you're hungry. They sat down at the table, and the conversation was easy at first. Amelia told them all about her art projects at school, her hands moving excitedly as she described her latest drawing. Isla listened with a small, fond smile and joined in with some teasing comments that made Amelia giggle. Victor watched them both, his heart full of pride and love. After dinner, when Amelia wandered off to explore again, Victor turned to Isla. I want to talk to you about something, he said, his voice calm but serious. Isla looked up from her plate, paying attention now. What is it? I've been thinking a lot about the future, Victor began. About what it means to be part of your lives and making sure you and Amelia have the stability you deserve. Isla didn't say anything, but Victor could see her posture stiffen, as if getting ready for something difficult. I've started the process to become your legal guardian, Victor continued gently. It's not something I'm doing lightly, and I want you to know that it's not about taking anything away from you or your mom. It's about making sure you and Amelia are safe and supported, no matter what. Isla's fork stopped in midair, and she looked at him, confused. What does that mean? Like adoption? Eventually, yes, Victor said. But right now, it's just the first steps. I want you to know that nothing will happen without your input. This isn't just my decision. It's yours too. Isla stared at him for a long time. She didn't say anything at first, and Victor could see her thinking carefully about what he had said. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet. Why now? Why do you care so much after all this time? Victor met her gaze. His voice was steady and full of honesty. Because I made a mistake leaving Winter Hollow all those years ago. I didn't know about you or Amelia, but I should have been there for your mom. I can't change the past, Isla, but I can do everything I can to make the future better for all of us. Isla didn't say anything right away. Victor could tell she was thinking hard about his words, testing them against the life she had lived for so long. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now. Amelia doesn't understand all this yet. She just sees you as the nice guy who buys her pancakes and plays games with her. But for me, it's harder. Victor spoke softly. I understand, he said. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Isla nodded slowly, and her face softened. Okay, she said quietly. The moment felt important, like things were changing. Victor knew there were still things to work through, but he was happy that Isla was listening to him and thinking about his words. As the evening went on, Victor brought out a small box from the living room and handed it to Isla. I found something I thought you might like, he said. Isla opened the box carefully. Inside, there was a photo of Sophia holding a young Isla. Victor had found the picture in Sophia's things, fixed it up, and put it in a shiny silver frame. Isla's eyes grew wide as she reached out to touch the glass. I remember this, she whispered. It was Christmas. Mom made cookies, and we stayed up late watching movies. Victor smiled and said softly, Your mom was amazing. She gave you and Amelia so much love. I hope I can honor that. Isla nodded, her eyes starting to fill with tears, but they were happy tears. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That night, as they were getting ready to leave, Victor hugged Amelia tightly. Her laughter filled the air as she wrapped her arms around his neck. Isla stood by the door, holding the photo close to her chest. You really mean it, don't you? She asked, her voice careful but steady. I do, Victor said, his voice full of sincerity. With all my heart. Isla looked at him for a moment, then gave him a small, genuine smile. Good. Victor watched them walk down the path to their apartment. The weight of the moment settled over him. He knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, he felt real hope. They were becoming a family, slowly and imperfectly, but it was happening. As spring turned to summer, and then to winter in Winter Hollow, Victor, Isla, and Amelia began to find a new normal. There were still moments where Isla put up walls, and Amelia sometimes didn't understand why things had changed so much. But Victor stayed patient, showing them love and care. He knew they were still figuring out how to be a family, but he was determined to prove that he was in it for the long haul. One warm evening, Victor decided to have a barbecue at his house. It was a small gathering, just a few close neighbors and friends he had made since coming back to Winter Hollow. Victor wanted Isla and Amelia to feel connected to the town and to know that there were people around who cared about them. The girls were hesitant at first, but Amelia's excitement won out. Isla, always protective, agreed to come to keep an eye on Amelia. The backyard was full of laughter, and the smell of food cooking on the grill filled the air. Amelia was running through the grass with a group of neighborhood kids, laughing as they played tag. Isla stood on the porch, watching them carefully. But there was something different about her. She seemed more relaxed, like she was starting to let her guard down. Victor walked over and handed her a glass of lemonade. Amelia looks like she's having the time of her life, he said. Isla nodded, a small smile on her face. She's never had anything like this before. Well, she deserves it, Victor said. So, do you? Isla looked at him. Her smile faded a little. It's weird, she said. Being here, doing all this, sometimes it doesn't feel real. Victor looked at her kindly. It's real, Isla, and it's not going anywhere. Isla looked away, thinking, I guess I'm still getting used to it. That's okay, Victor said. Take all the time you need. Later that evening, as the sun began to set and fireflies filled the yard, Victor gathered everyone for dessert. They toasted marshmallows over a small fire pit, while Amelia made s'mores, her face covered in chocolate. Isla sat quietly by the fire, watching the flames, but Victor could see that there was a peacefulness in her eyes. As the evening came to an end and the guests began to leave, Victor noticed that Isla was still standing by the fire pit. He walked over and sat next to her. Thanks for doing this, Isla said after a while. For Amelia, for both of you. Victor smiled. It's my pleasure. Isla hesitated. I think Amelia is starting to think of you as like a dad, she said. Victor's heart skipped a beat at her words, but he kept his voice calm. And what about you? Isla didn't answer right away. She looked into the fire, deep in thought. It's hard, she said quietly. I don't know how to trust it. Trust you. I understand, Victor said gently. And I'm not going to rush you. I'll be here, no matter how long it takes. Isla looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Why do you care so much? Because I see how strong you are, Victor said. How much you've done for Amelia. How much you've sacrificed. And because I care about you, Isla. Both of you. I want to be the person you can count on. Isla's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. I don't want to lose anyone else, she whispered. You won't, Victor said firmly. I promise. For the first time, Isla didn't argue. She didn't smile, but there was something in her expression, a flicker of trust maybe, or the first step toward it. As summer went on, Victor saw that trust growing in small, meaningful ways. Isla began to share more about her dreams. She talked about wanting to become a writer and how she loved creating stories. She even imagined one day seeing her name on the cover of a book. Victor encouraged her, buying her a notebook and a pen to help her get started. Amelia continued to grow and thrive. She loved her art classes and filled the house with beautiful drawings and paintings. Victor proudly hung them on the walls. She became more confident, and her bubbly personality shone brighter every day. By the time autumn came, Victor felt a peace he hadn't felt in years. The process of becoming the girls' legal guardians was moving along smoothly. They weren't finished yet, but they were already living like a family. They celebrated Amelia's 7th birthday with a party at the local park, complete with balloons, cake, and all her favorite friends. Isla even helped plan the party, her quiet involvement showing how far she had come. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching a movie, Amelia climbed onto Victor's lap. She wrapped her little arms around his neck and said sleepily, I love you, Victor. Victor's heart swelled as he kissed the top of her head. I love you too, Amelia. He looked over at Isla, who was curled up in the corner with her notebook. She caught his eye and gave him a small smile. It was the kind of smile that said more than words ever could. Victor realized then that everything he had been working for, every effort, every challenge, every step, had been worth it. They weren't perfect, and there was still a long way to go. But they were a family, and for the first time in a long time, Victor felt like he had found his true purpose. As the movie ended and the house grew quiet, Victor sat in the soft glow of the TV, holding Amelia close, glancing at Isla, who had fallen asleep with her notebook still in her lap. Outside, the world might have been unpredictable and chaotic, but here, in this small, quiet corner of Winter Hollow, there was love, there was hope, and there was the unshakable promise of a brighter future. If this story resonated with you or sparked new thoughts, I'd love to hear your perspective. Please share your insights in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay connected and never miss our upcoming videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.